This week's blog post is the Sculpture Synopsis Part 10 on the 19th century. For more on the how and why of the Sculpture Synopsis, see the first post in this series. I'll give you the URL at the end of this video. The series is also available as a playlist on my YouTube channel. This is the final post of the series. Each of these posts covers, very briefly, these topics: characteristic examples, the date, the location, the dominant ideas, the media, subjects, and style, major innovations that occurred in this period, big names in art, where to see the originals, and further reading. We start with characteristic examples. The major periods we've looked at, from Egyptian to Baroque, have had recognizable subjects and styles. In the 19th century, the most characteristic feature is the wide variety of subjects and styles, and the speed with which they change and spread. The dates are, well, it's 19th century, 1800 to 1900. If you want to pause and look at some of this, feel free. Location. France dominates 19th century sculpture in large part because the École des Beaux-Arts, established in 1648, remains the best training institution for aspiring sculptors. Americans as well as Europeans go there. Dominant ideas. At the beginning of the 19th century, Enlightenment ideas dominate, including the assumption that reality exists independent of man's mind, but that man can discover its nature by reason, observation, and logic, and that he can improve his life by acting on that knowledge. These ideas lead to the scientific and technological achievements of the Industrial Revolution. In art, they lead to the assumption that artists should be trained to represent reality accurately. Hence, Paris, the site of the centuries-old École des Beaux-Arts, becomes a mecca for sculptors. Over the course of the 19th century, the ideas of Immanuel Kant, 1724 to 1804, become widely accepted not just among philosophers, but among intellectuals and the common man. Kant states that man cannot know reality because his senses distort any data they receive. If he knows reality at all, it can only be by non-rational means, such as intuition, faith, or feelings. These ideas lead to major changes in artistic theory, including the idea that training is unnecessary, that the creation of art is the province of emotion rather than reason, that style is more important than subject, and that there is no objective standard for judging art. For more on these changes, see my book Seismic Shifts in Subject and Style, 19th Century French Painting and Philosophy. The media are marble and bronze. 2 notes. There are improved machines for creating reproductions of sculptures, which allows copies of sculptures to be made at affordable prices. At Tiffany's and other high-end stores in the 1800s, you could buy a reduced-size version of a major work for display in your very own home. The Hale in the center is a much smaller version of the original in City Hall Park. Also note, during the second half of the 19th century, sales of art shift from the annual Paris Salon, whose entries are vetted by conservative artists who belong to the French Academy, to small exhibitions or galleries where artists can sell their works year-round to an audience of collectors. This change in venue, combined with the sale of reduced-size versions, helps make sculptors less dependent for their income on commissions from the church or royalty or the government. This is one of the earliest and most famous gallery owners. On to subjects. Subjects of 19th century sculpture include portraits, ranging from life-size busts to over-life-size equestrian bronzes of military and political figures that are placed in public squares. By the end of the century, even relatively minor figures are commemorated in this way. In New York City, more than 50 outdoor portrait sculptures are dedicated by 1900. Another subject is allegorical figures, who stand for abstract concepts such as liberty, justice, and charity, as well as symbolic figures and mythological figures. This type of figure, the allegorical figures, as well as portraits, frequently stand in a new venue for sculpture. The landscaped municipal cemeteries, such as Père Lachaise in Paris, Forest Hills in Boston, and the Greenwood in New York City. During the City Beautiful movement, which begins with the 1893 Columbian Exposition and runs into the 1920s, allegorical, symbolic, and mythological figures are widely used as architectural decoration. Another subject is literary, historical, and legendary figures, such as Carpo's Ugolino on the left. There are also studies of anonymous figures, such as the steelworker in the center and the young ballerina on the right. Moving on to style. The dominant style of the late 18th century was neoclassicism, which harks back to the calm, dignity, and beauty of Greek and Roman works. See, for example, Canova's Perseus with the Head of Medusa on the left. Neoclassicism is associated with the Enlightenment and reason. The early 19th century sees the rise of Romanticism, a reaction against the neoclassical style. In sculpture, painting, music, and literature, Romanticism focuses on the individual and his emotions. It strives to arouse strong passions, whether positive or negative. On the origin and leading figures of Romanticism in painting, you can see my Seismic Shifts, Chapter 4. Over the course of the 19th century, Romanticism and Neoclassicism continue and begin to merge. Another point regarding style: the Industrial Revolution brings, along with much else, a remarkable increase in rate of communication. There is faster travel by means of steamships and railroads. There is near instantaneous communication by telegraph and telephone. There is cheap, fast printing with abundant illustrations. For art, this means that subjects and styles spread far more rapidly. And one more point under style: a remarkably high number of sculptors are trained at the École des Beaux-Arts and other art institutions, achieving high levels of technical ability with respect to anatomy, details, finish, and so on. What are the major innovations in this period? There are none in the sense of new means by which an artist can make viewers stop and look and think more intensely about his works. See the introduction to my Innovators in Sculpture for more on what I consider a major innovation. Auguste Rodin does introduce a major change, but not for the better, and I will talk about him in a moment. Big names in art. Jean-Baptiste Carpeau, 1827 to 1875, is the leading sculptor in France, and as I said, that's the country where most European and American sculptors are trained. This is his The Dance in front of the Paris Opera and Ugolino, a copy of which is at the Met Museum. Another big name in sculpture in this century is Auguste Rodin, 1840 to 1917, who changes the terms of the discussion about what a sculpture should be and should do by emphasizing style over content. Here's a quote. "Others may say that art is emotion, inspiration. Those are only phrases, tales with which to amuse the ignorant. Sculpture is quite simply the art of depression and protuberance. There is no getting away from that." End of quote from Rodin. For more on Rodin's career and works, see Innovators in Sculpture, Chapter 12. There are museums devoted to Rodin's work in Philadelphia and in Paris. In the United States, which is just beginning to produce world-class artists in the late 19th century, the first is Augustus St. Gaudens, 1848 to 1907, who creates the iconic images of Puritans, Abraham Lincoln, and many more. I've given you a link to a set of posts on my website about the St. Gaudens National Historic Site, which has many more of his works, and also to my book Artists Entrepreneurs, St. Gaudens, MacMonnies, and Parrish. Daniel Chester French, 1850 to 1931, becomes America's leading sculptor after the death of St. Gaudens. His most famous work is the seated Lincoln and the Lincoln Memorial in Washington. I've given you a link in the blog post to a series of posts on Chesterwood, French's home and studio. Where do you go to see the originals of 19th century sculpture? You should probably go to the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, which has French sculpture from 1848 to 1914. Works from 1847 and earlier are at the Louvre. You could also visit the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which is very good for American sculpture, and has a gallery of Rodin as well. In the United States, most of the outdoor sculpture in major cities and towns is 19th century or later. For sculpture in New York City, see my book Outdoor Monuments of Manhattan, and also From Portraits to Puddles, New York Memorials from the Civil War to the World Trade Center Memorial. Further reading. Innovators in Sculpture, Chapter 12 has an overview of 19th century sculpture and a discussion of Rodin's influence. A lot of my writing has been on 19th century sculpture, so you can see Artist Entrepreneurs, From Portraits to Puddles. If you're interested in art theory, Seismic Shifts in Subject and Style has a lot of quotes from painters on what they think of various aspects of art. You can also read these two books, which have selections from all the major artists who actually wrote on art. Not all of them did. For more on the why and how of the Sculpture Synopsis series, see the first post in this series. That's the URL. You can also listen to this as a playlist on my YouTube channel. And this is the final post in the series. DianeDurantewriter.com has hundreds of posts on sculpture, painting, architecture, and my other obsessions. To join the Sunday Recommendations email list, visit the URL that's on the screen or email me. And you can say, "Well done, Diane," or support my work and receive rewards by means of the tip jar on DianeDurantewriter.com. As always, thank you for listening.